valid after taking those three issues into account. I have handed a copy to my learned colleague. I beg leave to hand up to your lordship and to the learned assessor a copy of just sending out all the details for which he testified. If it may, with the court's leave, be marked as exhibit triple E12.
Any objections?
No objection, Lord.
Court, please. Lord, then, with the court's leave, I call our next witness, Dr. Mike Dutreva.
Michael Dennis Dutreva. I do.
Lord, we have handed out copies of Dr. Dutreva's curriculum vitae as well as the report to my own colleague. I beg leave to hand up to your lordship, and then there's also a copy of the CV as well as the report. Doctor, if I can just briefly highlight one or two aspects of your CV. I know the colleague has indicated that she doesn't place the content thereof in dispute, so I'm just going to quickly lead you and highlight certain aspects. It's correct that you obtained your MB-CHB from the University of Pretoria in 1977.
That's correct, my lord.
And that you obtained fellowship from the College of Surgeons, Neurosurgery, the College of Medicine, South Africa in 1987.
That's correct, my lord.
And you hold memberships of, amongst others, the Society of Neurosurgeons of South Africa, is that correct?
That's correct, my lord.
And also the Congress of Neurological Surgeons of the USA.
That's correct.
And then with regards to previous experience, Doctor, you, from 1983 until 1987, you set out your previous history and experience, and then from 84 to 87, you were registrar at the Department of Neurosurgery at Wentworth Hospital in Durban, is that correct?
That's correct.
In 1989, you were the registrar at the Department of Neurosurgery in the Institute for Neurological Science in Glasgow in the United Kingdom.
That's correct, my lord.
And then from 1990, you were a specialist lecturer at the Department of Neurosurgery in Wentworth Hospital and the University of Natal.
That's correct, my lord.
And you also, later on that year, became senior specialist lecturer at the same hospital and university.
That's correct, my lord.
And you still hold that teaching position?
I still hold the position of senior lecturer part-time.
There's one or two aspects, Doctor, that's perhaps not clear from your CV. Have you had any experience working with the forensic state departments?
Yes, I have no formal training in forensic medicine, but I have attended their departmental meetings for more than 30 years, participating in the cerebral brain cuts, the forensic brain dissections.
And would these state pathologists approach you if they want some feedback from you or some assistance or opinion?
Yes, the purpose is to work together with them, my Lord.
That's with the state pathologist?
With the state pathologist, yes.
And then, Doctor, you are, from this year on, you semi-retired, is that correct?
That's correct.
Do you still perform any surgery?
I perform very little surgery. My main work now is with the university as a senior lecturer and also doing some medical legal work.
Then, with regards to positions held, I just want to just quickly go through some of them as well. Is it correct that you were an examiner for the College of Medicine for the FCS SA Neurosurgery, the Part 2 final examination from the years 1992 until this year, 2017?
That's correct.
You were also the South African representative of the World Federation of Neurosurgeons meetings in 2007 in Japan. In 2009, you were a senior delegate at Boston, USA. In 2011 in Brazil, 2013 in South Korea, and in 2015 in Rome, Italy.
That's correct.
And you were the South African representative at the Continental Association of African Neurosurgical Societies, Algeria in May 2014.
That's correct.
And for 2007 and 2008, you were also the president of the South African Society of Neurosurgery.
That's correct.
Then with regards to your research, Doctor, I'm not also just going to refer to one or two aspects. You set out all the scientific papers that you presented, as well as the publications of peer-reviewed journals. Then perhaps in paragraph 3.6, I need to just highlight that. You were also invited to speak at sports-related concussion, the South African perspective at San Diego, USA in July 2016.
That's correct.
In paragraph 5 and sub 5.1, major research projects, you med neurosurgery, that your dissertation was the management of penetrating stab wounds to the head.
That's correct.
And then recent congresses attended, paragraph 6 and 6.1. The Society of Neurosurgeons of South Africa brought this with August 2015, is that correct?
That's correct, Lord.
And there were one or two others as well, and then perhaps 6.7, the Society of Neurosurgeons of South Africa, the Congress was held in Durban in July of this year, 2017.
That's correct.
Doctor, we then can go to specifically the report. We can first start with regards to your comment. The report it deals with two topics. First of all, your comments on the post-mortem on Rudy van Breda, as well as your comments on a certain version of the accused, which we'll come to a little bit later. First of all, with regards to the post-mortem on Rudy van Breda, it's correct that I referred you to the pre-explanation of the accused, in which he briefly, and I summarize, set out that he saw that his brother Rudy van Breda was attacked on his bed. But we know that from photographs, crime scene photographs, that his brother was eventually found on the floor at the bottom end of his bed, about 1.5 meters away from where he originally was on the bed. You remember that?
That's correct, yes.
And I also understand through you, and could you just place it on record, you had access to and had insight in the report of Dr. Perumal, marked Exhibit QQ.
That's correct. That's correct.
You've also had sight of the post-mortem report of Dr. Ansley, post-mortem she conducted on Rudy van Breda. It was, for purpose of the record, handed in and marked as Exhibit L, the post-mortem report. With We can just then ask you, Doctor, to read into the record the passage, paragraphs underneath the heading post-mortem on relief from Breda, please.
Certainly. None of the cerebral injuries described in the post-mortem report would have caused immediate death. The occipital lobe injury would have caused severe visual symptoms of his one eye. The temporal lobe injury could have caused speech disturbance, the nature of which would have depended on the exact site of the lesion. This is on the assumption that the deceased was left brain dominant. There is no report of any brainstem injuries, and there was no raised intracranial pressure, so death from a secondary cause, such as cerebral ischemia due to exsanguination, is the only explanation. It would be speculative on my part to conclude how long death would have taken, and I leave that up to the forensic pathologists. Gurgling would have been possible up to the time of death, as would have been some limited movement, since neither the right nor probably the left motor cortex were injured. It is also possible, given his injury, that he suffered a convulsion prior to his death. I have had insight into the reports by Dr. Peramel, forensic pathologist. In my capacity as a neurosurgeon, I am in agreement that it is possible that Rudy could have been capable of movement subsequent to sustaining the injuries as documented by Dr. Anthony, the state pathologist.
Just one or two aspects, Doctor, with regards to your last sentence in paragraph 1 about the assumption that the deceased was left brain dominant, which means he would have been right-handed.
Correct, yes.
You made that assumption?
Yes.
Now the evidence will, if I understand it correctly, well, let me ask you this. If he was ambidextrous or left-handed, what would be the inference of that?
The majority of people who are left-handed are still left brain dominant. So it would never be possible to be sure whether he was left brain or right brain dominant.
I see, okay. Now, Doctor, are you in a position to voice an opinion as to how long really would have survived since sustaining the injuries?
No, I have no idea about that.
And then the part of the brain responsible for motor function. Could you pick up anything on the post-mortem report by Dr. Anthony, whether any of that part of the brain, that is, for the purpose of the record, Exhibit L, whether any of that part of the brain was damaged or injured?
No, the motor cortex and the pyramidal tract system was all intact.
Now, the gurgling sound is described by the accused in his plea explanation that he heard emanate from the room. What could be possibly an explanation for that?
Well, I doubt, my lord, if that was speech. I presume it was probably blood or saliva at the back of the throat.
So that would have caused a partial blockage of the airways. That would have caused the gurgling sound. Is that understanding correctly?
That's what I would presume, yes.
Now, Doctor, with regards to the second part of your report, that is the version of the accused Mr. from Breda, again, I want to refer you to his plea explanation. I'm just very briefly going to read this to you. Paragraph 37, my lord, from Exhibit J, he indicated that during his pursuit of the attacker, he lost his footing and fell down the stairs. He said, I do not know what made me fall, but my fall was quite severe. I got up and moved towards the kitchen area. I saw that the kitchen door was open. At that stage, I did not know how many persons had been in the house, but there must have been at least two. And then if I can perhaps carry on, he then said he tried to make certain phone calls, tried to call his girlfriend. I'm paraphrasing this because this is not really relevant. And then he said, I started going up the stairs and I could hear Rudy in the bedroom. As I moved past the middle landing of the stairs towards the top, I saw Muddy moving about on the top landing line next to my mom. My mother was not moving. The last thing I recall seeing is Muddy and my mom. I then lost consciousness. I'm unsure whether this was due to the shock reported the injuries that I sustained when I fell down the stairs are a combination of both. So you were made aware during our consultation of that in this diversion. And
that's correct, my Lord.
The explanation. Then, is it correct, Doctor, that you also had sight of Exhibit LL, which is the the legal report, the J88, compiled by the district surgeon, Dr. Alberts, who was a witness in court as well?
That's correct. I have seen the J88, my Lord.
And we've also referred you and provided you with a copy of the report of a Dr. Van Sale, Michelle Van Sale, for the purpose of the record, that's Exhibit 00, my Lord, who examined the accused some later on the 27th, that evening at Varkeleeg at Mediconnect, approximately 16 hours after the...
That's correct. I've seen her report as well, my Lord.
Okay. Now, Doctor, could we just, then I'm going to ask you just to read the record, the passage underneath the version of the accused, Mr. Henry from the Dark, please.
So, retrograde and post-traumatic amnesia is a feature of traumatic brain injuries, including concussion, and can last from minutes to days depending on the severity of the impact. It's been well documented that during that time some normal physical activity, for example playing rugby, is possible, but the patient may have absolutely no recollection of those activities, and that loss of memory is usually permanent. Carry on. Any episode of loss of consciousness lasting 2 hours and 40 minutes following a head injury is an indication of a mild to moderately severe traumatic brain injury. I doubt, however, that this kind of injury, that is to say, one that could not have been picked up on an MRI scan, would have resulted in retrograde amnesia, that is, loss of memory prior to the insult, as this is usually an indication of a more severe traumatic brain injury. It is not possible to determine whether the accused had lost consciousness or whether he had merely lost recall of the incident. The mere fact that no evidence of a prior injury is visible on an MRI scan does not exclude the possibility that he had lost consciousness or recall of the events subsequent to hitting his head. Absent nystagmus, as reported on by Dr. Van Sale some 16 hours later, is of no value in excluding a previous concussion, especially after such a prolonged period.
Doctor, just very briefly, I just want you to comment on two aspects. Dr. Timmensma, a pathologist, testified in court. Her evidence was a loss of consciousness for a period of 2 hours and 40 minutes, a loss of memory, was 2 hours and 40 minutes, would be indicative of a serious brain injury to the extent that she would expect physical damage to the brain that you would be able to pick up on a scan. What is your comment on that?
No, that is incorrect. After any brain injury, my Lord, you can have abnormalities on an MRI scan. But in the case where a patient is fully conscious, as was described 4 hours after this injury, you would not expect an abnormality on the MRI scan.
Now, you have also had sight of the, not only the report of Dr. Alberts, but also the photograph that were taken of the accused that morning, approximately 8 o'clock, while he was sitting in the ambulance at the scene.
I have seen those photographs, yes, my Lord.
And you would recall that those photographs show a bump on the forehead, approximately above the left eye, which is also described by Dr. Alberts in the report, Exhibit LL, correct?
That's correct, my Lord.
Then Dr. Van Sale, in her evidence, testified that she, that evening, approximately 16 hours later, examined the accused and could not find any signs of nystagmus, and she then voiced the opinion that if he did suffer concussion earlier on during the, as he described, she would have expected signs of nystagmus to be present. What is your comment on that?
My Lord, you can get nystagmus after a concussion or a minor traumatic brain injury, but it is certainly not one of the hallmark signs of concussion. In fact, the vast majority of patients after a minor head injury or concussion do not have nystagmus.
Now, Doctor, finally, is there anything that you could pick up from the version of the accused? In summary, he describes potentially two falls. Once when he fell down the stairs, chasing after the attacker, and secondly, of course, when he lost consciousness, he would have fallen to the ground as well. The physical evidence of a hit against the head, and his description in the plea explanation, he's somewhat confused when he came to some 2 hours, 40 minutes later. That is inconsistent with a mild to moderate concussion.
No, his history, my lord, is consistent with a mild head injury.
Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Doctor. That's the questions I have for
Dr. Trudeau, you just understand correctly, a neurosurgeon, you're a neurosurgeon.
I'm a neurosurgeon, that's correct.
And a neurosurgeon is a person who specializes in surgery of the nervous system, especially the brain and the spinal cord.
That's correct, my lord.
Whilst a neurologist is the specialist in the anatomy, the functions, and organic disorders of the nerves and the nervous system.
Neurologists treat medical conditions affecting the nervous system.
Yes, they would treat what in layman's terms would be described as a brain damaged person?
No, not a traumatically brain damaged person, my lord. They treat conditions such as epilepsy, migraines, those type of conditions.
You see, in one of these sort of cases, in the third part of the case,
Yes, my lord.
the person who usually testifies as a neurologist, not a neurosurgeon.
I do a lot of third-party work, my lord.
With regards to what the court has just asked you, Doctor, do you really think that a neurosurgeon is the correct person to consider the list of possible causes for a loss of consciousness?
I do, my lord.
Why?
It's the neurosurgeon who is called on a Saturday afternoon to see the patients who are concussed, not normally a neurologist.
And what exactly was your mandate in this matter, Doctor?
I was approached to answer 4 questions over a period starting in May. The first question was whether or not I thought Mr. Rudy van Breda could have moved after his head injury. The second question was whether or not the loss of consciousness was, or amnesia could have caused the accused's symptoms. The third question was whether or not an MRI scan was likely to be abnormal. And the fourth question was the question of nystagmus.
Those were the only questions you asked.
Those were the only 4 questions that I was asked to comment on.
How did it then come about that in your report you also comment on Dr. Paramal's opinion?
Because Dr. Parable was the person who first asked me to comment on his report. So that was how I initially got involved. Very occasionally.
So, let me just understand correctly. He was the first person from the defense who made contact with you.
That is correct. Dr. Paramal has frequently in the past requested assistance from me to, if you like, give clinical input to his findings.
Excluding the plea explanation of the accused Exhibit J, were you given any of the evidence that is placed on record by the state?
So, could you just repeat? I didn't hear the question.
Excluding the plea explanation of the accused that you were given, were you also informed of what is the evidence before court that is presented by the state?
I've had very little of all of the evidence, but I certainly haven't read any of the DNA evidence, my lord. But I've been given the one post-mortem report, the J88, and the report by Dr. van Sale.
So did you read the testimony of Dr. Tinsman,
Sorry, who was Dr. Tinsman?
the pathologist?
I saw part of that testimony, yes, my lord.
Not the pathologist, Dr. also testified in this court regarding injuries of the accused. Were you made aware of
Oh,
that evidence?
no, I've not seen that evidence.
Did you consult or examine the accused himself?
No, I've not met him before.
So obviously you also didn't examine him on the 26th, 27th of January 2015.
Oh, no, not at all.
So, in fact, if I may summarize your evidence, Dr. Trevor, you were asked to comment blindly on possible causes for memory loss, loss of consciousness.
Yes, I think that's correct, my lord.
As was put on record before your testimony started, Dr. Trevor, at this point in time, the question of whether the accused lost consciousness or can't remember what happened is, in fact, just his version. It is not before court, it is not tested. So it's a bit difficult to cross-examine you, but he may change his mind later and come and testify, so there might be things that I have to put to you, which might not in the end of the day appear to be correct. This is what is on record at this point in time.
Just to make that clear, so the issue is to whether the accused lost consciousness or whether they lost recall of the incident. Two possibilities on the accused version.
That's correct, my lord.
But obviously a third version, or all versions, not the accused says.
Yes, I presume so, yes.
So, if I
In
understand...
other words, in the absence of the explanation of the two possibilities postulated, there is the possibility that he could not have lost consciousness.
Yes, I think that's correct, my lord.
Especially if one looks at the injuries and the mild nature of the injuries. Is that a possibility as well?
That's correct, my lord. All I was asked to comment on whether or not it was possible that he could have had a post-traumatic amnesic period of 2 hours and 40 minutes.
How great is that possibility?
It's a very common scenario, but without further information, it's not possible to come to any...
But it's further much more detailed information to come to a conclusion.
That's correct. And with the vast majority of minor traumatic brain injuries, my lord, it's not possible to know for sure the length of post-traumatic amnesia.
Dr. Trevor, just with regards to the first part of your report, the post-mortem injuries of Henry and of Rudy, specifically the part with the gurgling sounds. Do I understand your report correctly that it is your opinion that he would have been able to make gurgling sounds because of the blood or saliva in the back of his throat?
I didn't say he did make gurgling sounds. I said if he was heard to make gurgling sounds, then it was most probably due to blood at the back of the throat.
So do I understand correctly that that would not have been active sounds that he made? It's part of the
That's how...
still breathing.
That's correct, my lord. That's how I interpret gurgling.
The process of time.
Precisely, my lord.
And then also you state that you would have been able to make some limited movement.
That's correct.
And with limited movement, what would you include under limited movement?
Well, what I presume is that the blow to the head from the axe would have rendered Mr. Rudy unconscious. That's what I presume. I don't know that. Unconscious. That he would then have recovered a level of consciousness and possibly then been able to move. The post-mortem shows that the motor cortex is entirely intact. There is no damage to the motor cortex. So had he recovered consciousness sufficiently, he would have been able to make purposeful movement. But it would be completely speculative of me to say to what extent he was able to move.
So, in effect, you can't say whether he could have moved or not.
I can say he could have moved. I don't know whether he did move, my lord.
As I understand your report also, you comment on the possible mechanism of death as exsanguination.
Yes, that's speculative on my behalf.
Speculative?
Well, there is no other cause for death. There's no cerebral cause for death on the post-mortem report.
And as I understand exsanguination, that's when you literally bleed to death.
That's correct, my lord.
And by the point where you lose about 1/5 of your body's blood, total amount of blood, that is when it starts to take effect.
1/5 is a good rule of thumb, yes, my lord.
That's when your body goes into hypovolemic shock or hemorrhagic shock.
That's correct, my lord.
What effect would that condition have on a person, doctor?
That's not really my area of expertise, but I think it's common cause that as you lose blood, you become weaker. The brain is totally dependent on an adequate blood supply of well-oxygenated blood. So as your blood pressure falls, as your hemoglobin levels fall, there's less oxygen being carried to the brain, and you would then become disorientated and faint.
And seeing as there's no blood, or not enough blood in your body, your heart, in all probability, will also not be capable of pumping enough blood.
That's correct, my lord. You're not having enough blood pumped through your lungs, and so your blood has not been sufficiently oxygenated.
And that is why this type of condition requires immediate medical attention.
That's correct, my lord.
If I understand your report correctly, Doctor, you consider exsanguination a secondary cause of death?
No, that's not correct, no.
No, that's not what he says. He says death is from a secondary cause, not exsanguination is a secondary cause.
The witness might explain that, because as I read, then I might be reading wrong. Death from a secondary cause, such as cerebral ischemia due to exsanguination. I'm just trying to get from the witness exactly what he says.
Okay, I can explain that.
Yes, thank you.
In neurosurgical terms, we refer to the primary death from a primary cause, meaning death from a primary brain injury, as opposed to a secondary cause, such as lack of oxygen, lack of blood flow, raised intracranial pressure, and another list. There's a long list of other secondary causes. So I haven't explained myself well, but that's what I refer to.
In one of the photographs handed in by the defense, just a moment. Were you given photographs of the scene, Dr. Trevor?
I have seen photographs of the scene, yes, my lord.
Especially the bed on which Rudy was attacked.
I have seen those photographs, yes, my lord.
And the evidence of our bloodstain analyst, as well as it appears to be of Dr. Perumal, is also that Rudy had lain on that bed for a period of time, and he bled quite a lot on that bed. Would you agree with that?
There certainly is a lot of blood on the bed, yes, my lord.
And if I understand Dr. Perumal's report correctly, he also says that Rudy would at that point in time probably be in a concussional state as well. Would you agree with that?
I would think he was at least concussional, yes, my lord.
So a brain injury leading him to bleed profusely, because head wounds, there's evidence on record that head wounds bleed quite profusely.
Yes.
So which might lead to dizziness, and then also probably a concussional state.
I would agree with that, yes.
It's interesting to note, Dr. de Trouveau, you described Rudy as being able to make some limited movement, whilst Dr. Perumal is of the view that Rudy would have been able to make significant movements. my view, there's a difference between the two words. What is your comment?
I took into consideration what you've just explained as what would have been his general condition, namely the concussional state and the loss of blood. And in my view, he would not have been able to have stood and taken a few steps. He might have been able to crawl, but it would be speculative for me to say exactly what movements he would have been able to make. I would think, my Lord, that he would not have been able to stand and walk to make a phone call, for example.
Now, if I can show you, Doctor, Exhibit A, my Lord, photographs 188. Photographs 188 to 191.
Yes.
That is, are those part of the photographs that you were showing?
I have already seen these photographs, yes, my Lord.
So, whatever limited movement Rudy would have been able to make would then have to include that he moves from the bed, where Martin van Breda can be still seen partially on it,
Yes.
between the two beds, to the bottom of the second bed, and then end up on the floor.
Correct, yes.
So is it your evidence that he would still have been able to do that?
Yes, I think that would have been possible.
And then there is also, if you page on to photographs 202, to 209, specifically 209, Dr. Have you seen those photographs?
I have seen all of these photographs, yes. Yes.
Specifically, if you look at 209, Dr. There, next to the wall, between Rudy and the wall, there is what is on record a duvet. That duvet was initially on the bed at the foot end of which Rudy is lying, and it ended up on top of the blood pool next to Rudy. And if my memory doesn't is correct, then it's also sort
But
of...
not on Rudy's bed, on
sorry,
Henry's bed.
Henry's bed. Sort of rolled up on top of the blood. In my view, that would be a goal-directed action.
I would agree with that, yes.
Would Rudy have been able to do that?
With respect, I was wondering when my learned colleagues would go to this. We've had the evidence of Dr. Anthony transcribed, precisely we were expecting this kind of cross-examination. I specifically put to her, the state pathologist, the contents of the entire report by Dr. Perimont, including paragraph 6.5. Her comment on that is the following. She says, now I accept that, so 6.5, there are no aspects that you disagree with, no more. That passage contains what has been put as witness now. And unless my learned colleague is now indicating that she wants the court to disbelieve her own expert, this line of cross-examination, with respect, is irrelevant and serves no purpose. You can't go back on your own expert's concessions. It's strike law.
You know, we've been at this point before. That was what Dr. Anthony's evidence was in cross-examination. In re-examination, I specifically asked him, Dr. Anthony, you said initially you are not a bloodstain analyst. Please comment, what exactly do you agree with in the last two paragraphs of Dr. Paramel's report? And she said she only agrees with the first part of each of those paragraphs in stating that it could have been allowed.
With respect, my learned colleague is not correct with the summary. My reading to the record exactly what was put to her and exactly what she said. We'll make sure that we hand up a copy to her. Yeah.
No.
We just had her evidence transcribed. What I read with your leave. We'll make a copy of it. Can I just place on record what it reads, then I'll provide the copy later. My learned colleague in Breda said, thank you, my Lord. Dr. Anthony just shortly with reference to specifically Dr. Perumal's report, Exhibit QQ, paragraph 6.4. Given that you've tested that you are not a blood spatter or blood smear expert, doctor, and there are reference in both paragraph 6.4 and 6.5 about smear patterns and blood patterns, when you state that you agree with the content of that paragraph, does that refer to the possibility of the victim still being alive and able to move around whilst in 6.4 on bed, and then in the separate instance 6.5 whilst on the floor similarly? Is that what you agree with? Or do you also agree with the smear patterns and the causes hereof, etc., etc.? And she expressly answered the following. My Lord, I'm just agreeing with regards to the movement and the survival period of the deceased, but not the blood spatter, because I'm not an expert in regards to blood spatter analysis. That was the only re-examination respect. The movement, the pulling of the duvet has nothing whatsoever to do with blood spatter or blood stain. My learned colleague's statement is factually incorrect.
Lord, with all due respect, the movement is part of what this witness is testifying. Surely I'm allowed to ask him his opinion on that. Yes, so, Dr. Dutroux, the capability of Rudy van Breda performing the actions with regards to the duvet between himself and the wall.
So, my Lord, there is no physical reason why he could not have done purposeful movements. What I do not know is what his level of consciousness, confusion, and physical perspective based on the post-mortem report. Yes. That's correct, my Lord.
So that your opinion about his ability to move or not, Doctor, as I understand it, is totally dependent on whether he was conscious, semi-conscious, dizzy, all those factors which you have no evidence of.
That's correct, my Lord.
Now, with regard to the second part of the report, Doctor, the loss of consciousness, as I understand medical evidence very limitedly, you have a concept of diagnostic medicine, which you use to go by way of using all the available symptoms to eliminate possibilities and eventually get to the answer of what the cause for the condition is.
That's correct, my Lord. The history is the most important aspect of a clinical examination.
And there are quite a number of possibilities which could lead to a loss of consciousness.
That's correct, yes.
Has there been a loss of consciousness in action?
No, that's correct, my Lord, yes.
And given that we, at this point in time, do not know what the accused version is, whether he did in actual fact suffer a loss of consciousness or not, I need to put you the options to you, Doctor. So I'm not trying to pin you down one or the other, I'm just trying to go through the possibilities of loss of consciousness.
Okay.
So, as I understand it, one of them is obviously a medical condition. For instance, that you suffer from epilepsy or hypoglycemia due to diabetes.
Oh, there are many causes for loss of consciousness, yes.
Based on a medical condition.
Based on a whole host of medical conditions, yes.
But obviously for a medical condition to be diagnosed, it has to be there.
That's correct, and you base, yes, that's correct, yes.
Given what you've testified already, Dr. Dutroux, I accept or infer that you weren't informed of any specific such a condition that the accused suffered.
I was not informed of any comorbidities, no, my lord.
Especially not any condition that would cause lose consciousness.
But that's correct, my lord.
You were not informed of any similar loss of consciousness since the incident?
I have not been informed of any similar episodes.
So, and then also with regards to medical condition would also include possible drug use, which could cause you to lose consciousness?
Yes, medication, illicit drugs, alcohol, all of those can cause loss of consciousness.
You weren't informed of any such medication being taken by
respect,
you?
I'm leaving my learned colleague and I've given her some leeway, but with respect, what my learned colleague is now doing, she's moving on to the realms of privileged information in consultation with his witness. Firstly. Secondly, may I just remind your Lordship and my learned colleague that in the outset of this matter we made certain admissions which the state expressly asked us to make. And part of those admissions were that my client's blood was tested, drawn and tested for the presence of either blood in the ranks, one cause fact between the state and the defence.
The state is in the difficult position that we don't know what the accused evidence is. So, we're getting to the fact that the accused, it was admitted that the accused blood alcohol was clean, so to speak, for the night of the incident. But what I'm asking you is you weren't informed of any medication that he takes.
That's correct. I'm not informed of any medication.
So, the court can then exclude any medical condition or drug use as a possible cause for loss of consciousness.
As far as I'm aware, my lord.
Then there is another possible cause which Dr. Timmensma, who testified during the state's case, also alluded to. That's called, I hope I pronounce it correctly, a vasovagal syncope.
A vasovagal syncope, my lord, is what we would normally refer to as a fainting attack.
And as I understand that concept, Doctor, that is when your body sort of malfunctions because of an emotional shock, like from seeing blood or something.
I think it's possible to faint from something like that, yes.
And some of the symptoms, as I've been informed, is a pale skin, lightheadedness. Please correct me if you think I'm
No, that's correct. That's all correct.
Lightheadedness, tunnel vision, nausea, a warm feeling, also cold, clammy sweat, yawning, blurred vision.
That's correct. It's basically a lack of blood getting to the brain, so you feel faint.
And then from the other side, what other people might be able to notice from your demeanor is you might act in a jerky, abnormal manner, movements.
But normally when you have a vasovagal attack, you fall to the floor, and then the blood supply to your brain improves, and you feel much better.
So the moment your body is horizontal, the blood flow is restored and you recover.
You feel better.
Yeah. So it is not a question of you suffering a loss of consciousness for more than a couple of minutes?
I mean, as a neurosurgeon, I don't treat patients with vasovagal attacks, but that's what I would imagine, yes.
So if the accused testifies and says that he lost consciousness for 2 hours 40 minutes, it couldn't be from vasovagal syncope.
Unless he had a vasovagal syncope and fell and hit his head. And fell and hit his head, my lord.
That is the next possibility, a physical injury.
That's correct, my lord, yes.
Now, it was also put on record that it's very clear that the accused's loss of consciousness on a possible physical injury is not based on blood loss. That is not the reason why he lost consciousness. So if you have had regard to Exhibit C, the photographs of the accused when he was in the ambulance shortly after the incident.
I have seen those photographs, my lord. Thank you.
If one excludes the open wounds that caused blood loss, what other injury, doctor, do you notice that could have caused him to lose consciousness?
Well, he has that the bruising on the left side of the forehead. So I assumed that he'd hit his head and suffered an episode of concussion or a minor traumatic brain injury.
Doctor, if there's evidence on record that somebody punched the accused and he sustained that injury from a physical punch, would that cause a minor brain injury?
You can certainly suffer a concussion from a punch to the head. I'm sorry, my lord. I'm referring to photograph number 8, my lord. He's got photograph 8 and photograph 9 show bruising on the left side of the forehead. He has a left black eye and some bruising underneath both eyes. I must say the photographs that I looked at previously were clearer than this, my lord. Yes, the injuries are not very severe. So the injury to the head is a mild bruising.
Respect, my lord, up to get my strength. The evidence of the state witnesses by Dr. Albert, by Dr. Van Sal, referred to it as a bruising. Well, the lordship is now putting it to the witness that it's not a bruising. Yes, the bruise is and the swelling is described in a lot of detail by Dr. Albert, if I may persistence to the plot. She described it in her report.
Thank you, Mr. I've got a photo from you later. How significant? I'm not putting it to ask you. How significant was it?
The soft tissue injuries, my lord, do not look very severe.
You see, doctor, that's why I'm asking you about that, because in your report you referred to the retrograde and post-traumatic amnesia, and now the second part of your report, to a traumatic brain injury. And also the loss of consciousness lasting 2 hours 40 minutes, you say follow a head injury is an indication of a mild to moderately severe traumatic brain injury.
That's correct, yes.
And you describe the bruising on the accused's forehead as a minor traumatic brain injury.
No. I described the injury to the head as minor, but the injury to the brain as mild to moderate. You can get an injury to the brain without any impact to the head. I think that commonly occurs. that you can have a patient who is quite severely concussed but without any bruising on the head.
So how would he or she then sustain the concussion, severe concussion?
So concussion can be caused by either a direct impact to the head or an inertia type injury where the head is...
Objective verification?
I'm sorry, my lord?
Is there any objective verification of this injury?
No, there is no objective verification of this injury.
So what you're basically simply not being told?
Exactly, my lord.
Doctor, also, would you, when a patient has suffered, what he says is a period of 2 hours, 40 minutes, loss of consciousness, what would you, in normal circumstances, do with such a patient who tells you his history is, I lost consciousness in 2 hours, 40 minutes?
I would physically examine the patient. You need first to exclude any serious condition, and then examine the patient for concussion. And I would normally then admit such a patient for neurological observations.
Because it's not a common event for a person to just lose consciousness for 2 hours, 40 minutes without an injury accompanying it.
Oh, that's correct, yes.
And if this person would then consult a doctor and not inform the doctor of such an event, what would your opinion be of that?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite follow that, my lord, but why would you consult with the doctor if you weren't going to tell them what was wrong with you?
Indeed. If you consult the doctor, you get treatment. If you don't inform the doctor, listen, also just need to inform you that I lost consciousness earlier for 2 hours, 40 minutes.
So very often with concussed sportsmen, they don't tell you that they've been concussed because they don't actually know that they've had a retrograde amnesic period. So normally then you get that history from the family. So I think that's one possible explanation.
But when you get to the memory loss question, if I understand your report about this correctly, doctor, this retrograde memory loss, it's not selective, it's absolute.
It's absolute. So and it's very difficult to tell the difference between, when you obtain a history from the patient, it's very difficult to tell the difference between loss of consciousness and amnesia, because the patient can't explain the difference to you.
And amnesia would also be permanent.
The amnesia for that period is permanent, yes, my lord.
So it's not as if you could remember things, but not everything, and as time progresses, your memory comes back.
As time progresses, normally after a minor traumatic brain injury, your memory does not recover.
You see, Dr. Left, it's difficult to understand your evidence of if I understand correctly, a mild to moderately severe brain injury, and then the two doctors who examined the accused on the 27th of January do not note any sign of any concussion, any brain injury, and we don't even have to consider Dr. Albert, she's a state doctor. In case it might be said that she was a state doctor.
No, respect, my learned colleague's statement is factually incorrect. Dr. Alberts, by my reminder of the evidence, Dr. Alberts testified she did not check for any neurological problems. Secondly, Dr. Van Zyl, in fact, did check, because she testified that she did the nystagmus test. So she was actually looking for it. So the statement is factually not correct.
May I answer that?
If Mr. Breda says so, I will accept it. That was not my question to the doctor. It's getting to the question. My question is, the accused, according to evidence on record, consulted Dr. Van Zyl on the evening of the 27th of January. During this consultation, she put on record, or she said that they had quite a nice conversation. He asked her for treatment for the stab wound that he had, which she treated. She put in 2 clips, which she said wasn't really necessary, but she did that. But other than that, there was no indication of any head injury. She didn't even send him for any further scans because there was no signs of any such thing.
So, my Lord, I think that that's a very common scenario. It is very common that patients who have been concussed, say at a rugby game on Saturday, are seen on Sunday morning and their neurological examination is entirely normal. I think that's a very common scenario.
Just to understand you correctly, Doctor, do you say, is it your evidence that the possible injury that could have led to the mild to moderate severe head injury or trauma to the accused might be the bruise on his forehead?
It may not be the bruise to the forehead, it could be an impact to the brain. And that impact could be either direct or indirect.
Depending
on the mechanism of the injury.
Look, might I ask that we take the clear judgment list? That's just something I want to check out before Mr. Breda objects to my... no, I won't be done anything within...
I would appreciate that, my Lord.
Praise God.